The Arakan jungle was suffocating, a green hell, where the air hung heavy and still. The humidity clung to everything, a constant reminder of the decay and tension that permeated every inch of this forgotten land. It was a place where secrets festered beneath the dense canopy, and where the unwary could easily lose their way, both physically and mentally. Sunlight barely reached the ground, struggling to penetrate the thick foliage, casting everything in a ghostly, ethereal green. The light that did manage to filter through created an eerie, almost otherworldly atmosphere, highlighting the strange and unfamiliar flora that thrived in this shadowy realm. Suddenly, musket fire shattered the silence, ripping through the stillness like a jagged tear in fabric. The sharp crack echoed through the trees, a stark and violent intrusion upon the jungle's ancient slumber. British East India Company soldiers, sweating in their impractical red wool uniforms, felt the fear rise in their throats. They formed a line, a rigid, disciplined formation, drilled into them on parade grounds far, far from home, facing an enemy they barely understood, an enemy that seemed to melt into the very fabric of the jungle itself. From the shadows, Burmese warriors emerged, silent and deadly. They were led by the formidable Maha Bandula, a brilliant military strategist and a symbol of Burmese resistance. No uniforms, no bright colors to betray their position, just fluid, silent movement. Ghosts of the jungle, masters of its hidden pathways and deadly secrets. Their war cries echoed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down the spines of the British soldiers, swords flashing in the dim light, ready to strike. This was more than a skirmish. It was a collision of empires, a clash of cultures, and a battle for dominance. The British, with their brown Bess muskets and rigid discipline, honed on European battlefields, faced a new kind of war, a war where the rules were different, and the enemy was everywhere and nowhere at once. The Burmese, confident from years of conquest and expansion, their armies having swept across neighboring lands, believed these pale-faced foreigners, weakened by disease and unfamiliar with the terrain, would be easily swept aside. The jungle itself became a third adversary, a silent, watchful presence, heat that sapped strength, insects that tormented the skin, and unseen dangers lurking beneath every leaf and shadow. For the men fighting in this green inferno, survival, not glory, was all that mattered. This clash marked the end of a long, simmering Cold War, a period of uneasy peace and growing tensions between the expanding British Empire and the proud Kingdom of Burma. Two cultures, two vastly different military traditions, each with its own strengths and weaknesses, were now locked in a brutal struggle for control of this vital region. The jungle would test British discipline and Burmese courage alike, pushing both sides to their breaking points. The outcome of this conflict would redraw the map of Southeast Asia, reshaping the political landscape for generations to come. One empire fueled by ambition and industrial might would rise to new heights of power. The other, weakened by internal strife and outdated tactics, would begin its long and painful decline. The stakes were nothing less than the future of the region, the control of its resources, and the destiny of its people. In this forgotten corner of Asia, far from the centers of power and the eyes of the world, history was being rewritten in blood and mud, in the sweat and tears of soldiers fighting for their lives and their empires. The first shots of the First Anglo-Burmese War had been fired, igniting a conflict that would forever alter the course of Burmese history. The world, though it barely noticed at the time, would never be quite the same. The balance of power had shifted, and the age of colonial expansion was entering a new and even more brutal phase. The jungle, indifferent to the ambitions of men and the fate of empires, watched it all unfold, its ancient trees bearing silent witness to the carnage and the changing tides of history. Britain's hunger for resources was insatiable, a driving force behind its global ambitions. The Industrial Revolution had created an unquenchable thirst for raw materials, and the promise of lucrative markets drove its expansion relentlessly eastward, seeking new territories to exploit and control. The East India Company was the spearhead of this expansion. The British East India Company, with its formidable private army, was more than just a trading enterprise. It was a state within a state. It had already transformed India, reshaping its economy, its politics, and its very social fabric under the weight of colonial rule. Now, it eyed Burma, not just for trade and the riches it held, but also as a crucial buffer zone, strategically vital to protect India from potential rivals and maintain British dominance in the region. The Konbaung Dynasty, relatively young and fiercely ambitious, had risen to power in Burma. It had unified Burma through military force, forging a kingdom through conquest and asserting its authority over diverse territories. Burmese kings, secure in their divine right, saw themselves as the rightful rulers of the region, destined to expand their influence. They believed they were destined for greatness, to preside over a powerful and prosperous kingdom. To them, the British were merely meddling merchants, tolerated for their trade but viewed with suspicion. They were not equals in the eyes of the Burmese court. Two powerful empires, both expanding their reach and influence, were inevitably bound to collide in a clash of interests and ambitions. The British, with their legalistic mindset, firmly believed in the sanctity of treaties and the inviolability of defined borders. They sought to impose their system on the region. The Burmese, steeped in the traditions of absolute monarchy, operated under a different set of principles. They adhered to a system of tribute, where weaker states acknowledged the supremacy of the stronger through symbolic offerings. Each side fundamentally misunderstood the other's intentions, leading to a dangerous cycle of misinterpretations. British merchants, eager for profit, frequently complained of mistreatment and unfair trade practices, while Burmese officials, wary of foreign influence, saw only British arrogance and a disregard for local customs. The constant flow of refugees fleeing conflict, coupled with ongoing border disputes and a deep-seated mutual suspicion, all fueled the flames of animosity and mistrust. Every diplomatic incident, every perceived slight, only shortened the fuse leading to war. The stage was irrevocably set for a major conflict, a clash of civilizations and empires. Meaningful negotiation had become virtually impossible, as both sides were entrenched in their positions. Two powerful empires, each utterly convinced of the righteousness of their own cause, moved inexorably and unstoppably toward a devastating war. The slow-burning fuse of resentment and misunderstanding was now poised to explode in a cataclysmic burst of violence. The Konbaung Dynasty's ambitions didn't stop at Burma's borders. Under King Bagyada, Burmese armies conquered Arakan, Manipur, and Assam, each conquest pushing closer to British India. Refugees flooded into British territory, straining relations. The Burmese demanded their return. The British refused. The conquest of Manipur devastated the region, leaving scars remembered for generations. With Assam's fall, the Burmese army stood at Bengal's doorstep. General Mahabandula, now in command, boasted of taking Calcutta. The British, alarmed, saw their buffer states vanish. Cross-border raids and Burmese expansion made the frontier a tinderbox. Diplomacy failed, warnings were ignored. The British saw an aggressive power threatening their empire. The Burmese saw a foreign force encroaching on their domain. The crisis could no longer be managed with words. The frontier was ablaze, and war was inevitable. The flames were spreading toward British India. The spark that ignited the First Anglo-Burmese War was a seemingly insignificant dispute, a disagreement that rapidly escalated into a full-blown conflict. This dispute centered around Shapuri Island, a muddy, unassuming strip of land situated at the mouth of the Naf River. Strategically, the island held little value. It was a small, easily overlooked piece of terrain, yet it became a potent symbol of national pride and imperial ambition for both the British and Burmese empires. In 1823, tensions reached a boiling point when Burmese troops crossed the river and seized the island, establishing a military presence. In the process, they clashed with and killed several British sepoys stationed there, triumphantly raising their flag as a sign of conquest and dominance. News of this event reached Calcutta, the headquarters of the British East India Company, and was immediately perceived as an act of invasion and aggression. However, in Ava, the Burmese capital, the seizure was viewed as a rightful assertion of their sovereignty and territorial claims. The British swiftly retaliated, launching a counter-offensive to retake the island by force. But the initial act of aggression had already inflicted irreparable damage to the already strained relationship between the two powers. British demands for a formal apology and reparations were met with staunch defiance from the Burmese court. Diplomatic avenues were exhausted, and escalation towards war became an unstoppable force. Both sides began extensive military preparations, mobilizing their armies and resources for the inevitable conflict. Finally, on March 5, 1824, the British government formally declared war on the Kingdom of Burma, setting the stage for a protracted and bloody struggle. The decision to go to war was not taken lightly. It was a grave and momentous choice. British leaders fully understood that a war in Burma would be a costly and demanding undertaking, both in terms of manpower and financial resources. Despite the anticipated challenges, British leaders ultimately concluded that they had no other viable option. The perceived threat of Burmese expansionism, coupled with the blatant disregard displayed during the Chapari Island incident, had convinced them that the security and stability of their empire in the region were at serious risk. The war that followed was not primarily driven by the pursuit of riches or territorial gain, but rather by a complex interplay of imperial pride, the perceived need to safeguard their existing territories, and the defense of national honor. Thus, two powerful empires found themselves locked in a bitter and protracted struggle over a seemingly insignificant and easily forgotten island. With the first shots fired in anger, the die had been cast. There was no turning back from the path of war. The British planned a bold strike using sea power to bypass Burma's armies and seize Rangoon. In May 1824, a massive British force landed at the city's gates. The Burmese, caught off guard, had evacuated Rangoon entirely. The British found an empty, silent city, no people, no supplies. Their victory was hollow, the land had been denied to them. Venturing beyond the city, British troops faced constant ambushes from Burmese skirmishers. The monsoon rains began, turning everything to mud. The British, isolated and cut off, became the besieged. Disease swept through the camp: malaria, dysentery, scurvy. Soldiers died in droves, not from bullets but from sickness. The capture of Rangoon became a nightmare. The jungle and Burmese tactics were slowly destroying the invaders. The British held the city, but the real battle had just begun. The siege of Rangoon would test them to the breaking point. The war became a clash of military philosophies. British discipline and firepower met Burmese guerrilla tactics. In the jungle, British formations broke down, clear lines of sight vanished. The Burmese struck from the shadows, then disappeared. Their Da swords were deadly in close combat. Their stockades absorbed cannon fire. War elephants carried supplies and commanders through the jungle. The British adapted, using gunboats to control the rivers and bypass the jungle. Their muskets and cannons were superior, but the Burmese knew the land. Night attacks and psychological warfare wore down British morale. The British learned to fight in small, mobile columns. They came to respect the stockade and the Burmese sword. It was a war of adaptation. Survival depended on learning fast. The jungle was the true battlefield, and only the adaptable would survive. The outcome hung in the balance. Disease, not bullets, was the war's deadliest weapon. Monsoon rains turned camps into swamps. Malaria and dysentery ravaged the troops. Scurvy weakened bodies. British medical services were overwhelmed. Of 15,000 British and Indian dead, most fell to disease, not combat. Regiments were decimated, morale collapsed. Rangoon became a city of graves. The suffering extended to Burmese civilians. War disrupted agriculture, created refugees, and brought famine. Villages burned, supply lines collapsed, and civilians suffered. The war's true cost was measured in human misery. Colonial expansion was no glorious adventure, it was a tragedy. The scale of death revealed the limits of imperial power in the tropics. The scars would last for generations in both Burma and Britain. The price of ambition was paid in blood and sorrow. After 2 years of brutal war, the British gained the upper hand. Superior logistics and reinforcements pushed the Burmese back. General Campbell's army advanced up the Irrawaddy, capturing key cities. The death of Mahabandula shattered Burmese morale. By early 1826, the British threatened the capital. King Bagyadao, desperate, sued for peace. The Treaty of Yandabo was harsh. Burma ceded Assam, Manipur, Arakan, and Tenasserim. A British resident was installed in Ava. Trade was open to British merchants. The indemnity, £1 million, nearly bankrupted Burma. The treaty ended Burma's imperial ambitions and marked its subjugation. The Konbaung Dynasty was humbled, its power broken. The war's end set the stage for further British encroachment. Burma's fate was sealed by defeat and humiliation. The First Anglo-Burmese War changed Southeast Asia forever. Britain secured its Indian frontier and gained valuable territory. The war paved the way for further conquest and the eventual annexation of Burma. For Burma, defeat brought humiliation, economic ruin, and the loss of confidence. The seeds of Burmese nationalism were sown in the ashes of defeat. The war's legacy shaped Myanmar's borders and its relationship with Britain. Colonial scars and mistrust lingered long after the empire faded. The conflict is a lesson in the costs of imperial ambition and cultural misunderstanding. Remembering this war deepens our understanding of colonialism's impact. The jungle clash echoes through history, reminding us of the enduring price of war. The forgotten war's shadow still shapes the present.